My name is Eleanor Miller, I'm 42 years old, and my new daughter-in-law made me sit at the loser's table at my own son's wedding. Before I tell you about the spectacular revenge I got with the help of a mysterious billionaire, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The first thing I noticed was the draft. A cold, persistent breeze that smelled faintly of dish soap and old roses. A young woman in a blush-pink bridesmaid dress, whose name I couldn't remember, led me through the glittering ballroom in Charleston. Her smile was practiced and plastic. "Here you are, Mrs. Miller," she said, her voice dripping with fake cheerfulness. She gestured to a small, round table tucked away in a dim corner, practically in the service hallway. It was right next to the swinging doors of the kitchen. My table. I stared at it. A single wilting flower in a tiny vase. 3 chairs, though I was the only one being seated. It was the furthest table from the head table, where my son, my only child Jacob, was beaming at his new bride. It felt like a punch to the gut. All the air went out of my lungs. For 20 years since a car crash stole my husband from me, my entire world had revolved around Jacob. I worked 2 jobs, managing a small diner during the day and bookkeeping at night, just to scrape together every penny for his college fund so he could go to that fancy law school. And he did it. He became a lawyer, and I had never been prouder. That was where he met Brittany Davenport. Brittany, with her perfect blonde hair, her family's old money, and a smile that never quite reached her cold, calculating eyes. From the moment Jacob brought her home to my small 2-bedroom house, she looked at me like I was something she'd scraped off her designer heel. "Oh, Eleanor," she'd say, drawing out my name. "You still work at that little restaurant? How quaint." She treated my life's work, the sacrifices I'd made, like a hobby. The cruelty had been subtle at first, 1,000 tiny cuts. But it had escalated. Just last night at the rehearsal dinner, I was wearing a simple, elegant navy blue dress I'd saved up for months to buy. I finally felt for a moment like I belonged in their world. Brittany had stumbled near me, and a full glass of red wine had cascaded down the front of my dress. A dark, ugly stain bloomed across the fabric. "Oh goodness!" she gasped, dabbing at it uselessly with a napkin. "I'm so sorry." "Well," she'd added with a conspiratorial whisper to her mother, loud enough for me to hear, "that color was probably a bit aging on you anyway." So here I was in my 10-year-old backup dress, being led to the forgotten corner of the room. The bridesmaid gave me one last pitying look and scurried away, back to the light and the laughter. I sat down on the wobbly chair. From here I could see everything. I saw Jacob laugh, his head thrown back. I saw him kiss Brittany's hand. He was so caught up in his perfect new life, he didn't even notice where they had put his mother. He hadn't even looked for me. I was just a ghost at the feast, a loose end from his old life that Brittany was trying to tuck neatly out of sight. I felt a hot flash of shame crawl up my neck. I wanted to run, to disappear, to not give her the satisfaction of seeing me so broken. I took a deep breath, clutching my small purse in my lap, feeling completely and utterly invisible. And I thought that was the worst of it. But then I looked up, across the sea of smiling faces, and saw Brittany gliding towards the stage. She picked up the microphone, and that venomous, sugar-coated smile I knew so well spread across her face as she looked directly at me. I felt a cold dread wash over me. I had no idea what was coming, but I knew it was meant to destroy me. My blood ran cold, a sudden sharp iciness that started in my stomach and spread through my limbs. Brittany's voice, amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system, was like honey mixed with finely ground glass. "And of course," she said, her eyes finding mine like a heat-seeking missile, "we couldn't go on without a special thank you to Jacob's mother, Eleanor." The applause was polite, a duty-bound ripple that did nothing to warm the chill in the room. 100 heads swiveled in my direction. I felt my smile strain at the corners, a brittle thing I was afraid might crack. Just then a spotlight, hot and unforgiving, slammed down on me, bleaching out the rest of the room and leaving me pinned and exposed. I felt like a bug on a display board, every flaw magnified. "Eleanor," Brittany purred, her voice a weapon wrapped in velvet. A true warrior woman. The words were right, but the tone was all wrong, dripping with a condescending pity that was more insulting than any slur. She raised Jacob all by herself after her husband's tragic passing. She let the words hang, each one a stone thrown into a still pond, the ripples spreading out to remind everyone of my history, my incompleteness. She worked so hard for so many years to give Jacob the best. I'm sure she never had a single moment for herself. I could feel it in the air, that thick, cloying wave of sympathy from strangers. It was a suffocating blanket. I saw one of her aunts, a woman dripping in diamonds, press a delicate napkin to the corner of her eye. They weren't seeing me. They were seeing a sob story she was painting for them. I mean, Brittany leaned into the microphone, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush that somehow felt louder than a shout. It must be so incredibly difficult to put your entire life on hold for your child, to give up any chance of your own happiness, your own companionship. She scanned the crowd, letting them absorb the tragedy of it all. I was listening to Jacob tell a story the other day about how when he was little, he wanted this expensive bicycle for his birthday. Eleanor couldn't afford it. She told him that grown-ups don't always get what they want. Can you imagine? Having to tell your own child that because you just couldn't provide. She twisted the story, taking a memory of a lesson I taught him about gratitude and turning it into a tale of my financial failure. The truth was I'd worked 3 straight weeks of overtime shifts to buy him that very bicycle, surprising him with it a month later. But no one here knew that. They only heard her version. Perhaps that's why she's here alone tonight, she said, delivering the final killing blow. She was just too busy being a martyr, or maybe. Her voice was now a stage whisper that echoed through the silent room. After all these years, no man was willing to take on a woman with that much baggage. Baggage? The word exploded in the silence. It was followed by a wave of muffled titters and low murmurs. It was a punch to the gut, so violent it knocked all the air from my lungs. My son. My love for him, the life I built for him, the sacrifices I made with a joyful heart. She had just labeled it all as undesirable baggage. I risked a glance at the head table, a desperate, silent plea to my son. Jacob, please. Say something. He was staring down at his plate, his face ashen. He nervously adjusted his tie. He wouldn't look at me. He picked up his champagne flute, his hand trembling slightly, and took a long sip. He was a lawyer, a man paid to argue, to defend, to speak. But in the face of his mother's utter demolition, he was silent. His silence wasn't just a lack of words. It was an agreement. It was a surrender. It was the final devastating betrayal. My vision started to blur, the glittering chandeliers swimming in a haze of unshed tears. I will not cry here. I will not. A waiter, the very same one who had sidestepped me earlier, bustled past my table. My throat was so tight I could barely breathe. Excuse me, I croaked, trying to get a glass of water, anything to anchor myself. He didn't even break his stride. It was then I knew with absolute certainty that this was all a coordinated attack. I was being systematically erased. Brittany finished her speech with a triumphant, "To new beginnings," and the room erupted in applause for her, the brilliant, beautiful bride. My new beginning, it seemed, was this cold, empty corner. The shame was a physical thing now, a hot, heavy cloak. I had to get out. I fumbled under the table for my purse, my fingers clumsy and numb. I would leave. I would walk out that door and never look back. I would let them have their perfect world without me in it. I pushed my chair back from the table. The sharp scraping sound it made on the floor was the only protest I had made all night. I put my hands on the table to push myself up, to begin my long, lonely walk of shame out of that room. But just as I was about to rise, a deep, calm voice spoke right beside me, so close it made me jump. "Is this seat taken?" I flinched, snapping my head around. A man was standing there, emerging from the shadows of the service hallway like he belonged there. In the chaos of my own emotions, I hadn't even noticed him approach. He was tall, and his charcoal suit was so finely tailored it made him seem carved from stone. He was handsome, but it wasn't a soft, boyish handsomeness. It was weathered, mature. There were faint lines around his deep brown eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he wasn't smiling now. He was looking at me with an expression of quiet, focused intensity. I was so stunned I could only shake my head dumbly. "Good," he said, and with an easy, unhurried grace, he pulled out the chair beside me and sat down. The entire table seemed to steady itself with his presence. He leaned in, creating a small, intimate space just for the two of us, a bubble against the hostile environment of the room. My name is Arthur Vance, he said, his voice a low, pleasant baritone. It was a voice of authority, calm and unshakable. I was a guest of the Davenports, but I believe I'm in much better company over here. His eyes held mine. I saw what just happened. The speech. The table. The wine stain on your other dress. My eyes widened. He had seen that? How? I was in the hotel bar last night when your daughter-in-law made her little scene, he explained. And I've been watching her tonight. She operates with all the subtlety of a bulldozer. He paused, his gaze searching my face. No one deserves that. Thank you, I stammered, my mind still trying to process his sudden appearance. A stranger. A handsome, impeccably dressed stranger was sitting at my loser's table, defending me. It didn't make any sense. You have two options as I see it, he continued, his voice practical and low. Option 1, you leave. It's a perfectly reasonable choice. You walk out with your head held high and you go home. But, he added, a slight edge to his voice, that's exactly what she wants. She wins. Option 2. He paused, a flicker of something daring in his eyes. You stay. You let me sit here with you. And we give them a different story to tell. We can turn this whole night on its head. The sheer audacity of it was like a splash of cold water to the face. For the last hour I had been a victim, a passive recipient of cruelty. He was offering me a chance to be a player. An actress. What did I possibly have to lose that hadn't already been taken? A single, shaky nod was my only answer. A slow smile touched the corners of his mouth. It transformed his face, erasing the sternness and replacing it with a warm, conspiratorial charm. Excellent choice. He immediately shifted in his chair, turning slightly more towards me, creating a visible tableau of intimacy. He signaled a waiter. The man, who looked to be the head captain, rushed over immediately, his expression one of fawning deference. Mr. Vance. Is everything all right, sir? Can I get you something? Everything is perfect, Arthur said smoothly, his eyes never leaving mine. My friend and I would like a bottle of the Dom Perignon. And bring 2 glasses. The captain's eyes flickered to me for a fraction of a second, his professional mask unable to hide his shock. Of course, sir. Right away. As he bustled off, Arthur turned back to me. Now, he said, his voice soft and compelling. Forget all of them. Tell me about Eleanor Miller. What's the one thing you've always dreamed of doing but never had the time for? The question was so simple, so direct, so personal. No one had asked me a question like that in 20 years. And as I started to talk, telling him about a half-forgotten dream of opening a small bed and breakfast on the coast, I felt a part of myself I thought had died long ago stir back to life. I had to know. Why are you really doing this? I asked, interrupting my own story. He grew serious. I told you I have an allergy to bullies. My ex-wife. Our divorce was a national headline. She tried to use the press to paint me as a monster and herself as a victim. Her tactics were the same as your daughter-in-law's. Public humiliation, twisting the truth, playing the martyr. She tried to destroy my reputation. For a while she almost succeeded. I learned then that when you're dealing with people like that, you can't just absorb the blows. You have to change the narrative. He looked at me, his gaze unwavering. And tonight, Eleanor, you deserve to be the hero of your own story. His words wrapped around me like a warm blanket. He wasn't just being kind. He understood. He had been there. Across the room, I saw Brittany's head snap in our direction as the captain arrived with the champagne, presenting the bottle to Arthur with a flourish. Her perfectly made-up face was a mask of pure, unadulterated confusion. Her smile was gone. Her victory had been stolen from her. She's watching us, I murmured. Arthur looked over his shoulder, then turned back to me, a brilliant, dangerous glint in his eyes. Wonderful, he said as the champagne popped. Let the curtain rise. The moment the champagne cork popped, it was like a starter pistol had gone off. The entire social dynamic of the room pivoted on its axis. The whispers started instantly, a low hum that grew into an audible buzz. I could feel it, the magnetic pull of hundreds of eyes, all turning away from the head table and locking onto our forgotten corner. One of Brittany's uncles, a loud, red-faced man who had been holding court at a nearby table, stopped mid-sentence. His jaw literally dropped. Good Lord, he muttered to his wife. That's Arthur Vance. The name shot through the room like an electric current. Vance. Vance Hotels. The reclusive billionaire. The man whose divorce had been splashed across the tabloids a few years ago. Suddenly I wasn't the poor widow anymore. I wasn't Jacob's embarrassing mother. I was the woman sitting with Arthur Vance. I was a mystery. A headline. A delicious piece of gossip far more interesting than the wedding itself. Brittany felt the shift immediately. She was a creature of attention, and the sudden loss of it was a physical blow. Her posture stiffened. The happy bride vanished, replaced by a territorial hostess whose party was being upstaged. After a frantic, hissed exchange with her mother, who looked just as bewildered, Brittany began to move. She navigated the tables with a predatory grace, that fake, brilliant smile plastered back on her face. She was coming to reclaim her territory. "Mother Miller," she trilled as she arrived, her voice a little too loud, a little too sharp. "And Mr. Vance. What a surprise. I must apologize for the seating. Our wedding planner must have made a mistake. We absolutely must find you a better table." It was a desperate attempt to regain control, to frame my location as an unfortunate error rather than a deliberate act of malice. Arthur rose from his chair, a towering, elegant presence. He smiled, a polite but impenetrable smile. "No need to apologize, Brittany. We're perfectly comfortable here. In fact," he said, his eyes twinkling, "we were just enjoying the privacy." The subtle implication that we wanted to be alone was a masterstroke. It immediately framed us as a couple, not as a random pairing. Brittany's smile tightened. "Well, I'm just so curious," she pressed on, unable to let it go. "You must tell me how you two know each other. Jacob never mentioned you were friends with anyone so prominent." The insult was clear. How could someone like me possibly know someone like him? Before I could even try to formulate a lie, Arthur answered for me. He placed his hand on the back of my chair, a gesture of casual possession. "Oh, Eleanor and I go way back," he said, his voice a silken smooth fiction. "We prefer to keep our friendship private. You know how it is. In a world full of so much noise." He looked pointedly around the opulent ballroom. "It's refreshing to find something genuine and quiet." It was another perfectly aimed dart. He had not only validated our connection but had also subtly criticized the ostentatious spectacle of her wedding. He was speaking a language of understated power that she desperately wanted to understand but couldn't. She was flustered, her social graces failing her. "But to be seated over here, by the kitchens," she stammered, her desperation showing. She was losing this battle and she knew it. Arthur raised an eyebrow, a picture of innocent confusion. "Is there something wrong with this table?" He looked around our little corner with a thoughtful expression. "I don't know," he said, his voice now carrying to the nearby tables that were shamelessly eavesdropping. "Sometimes the most valuable things aren't the ones on display for everyone to see. Sometimes," he paused, his gaze landing on me with a look of profound admiration, "the greatest treasures are hidden away, waiting for someone who knows what they're looking for." Checkmate. The entire room heard it. He had just called me a hidden treasure in front of her entire family. He had taken her most potent insult, my invisibility, and turned it into my greatest asset. Brittany's face was a battlefield of emotions. Fury, embarrassment, disbelief. She looked like she wanted to scream. She opened her mouth, a sharp retort on her lips, but no sound came out. She was beaten. Utterly and completely beaten. Arthur let the devastating silence linger for 1 beat, 2 beats, and then he turned to me, dismissing her as if she had ceased to exist. He extended his hand. "If you'll excuse us," he said, his voice warm and inviting, cutting through the thick tension. "I believe the band is playing our song, and I would be honored if you would allow me to have this dance." My hand found his, my fingers trembling slightly. As he led me away from the table, past a shell-shocked Brittany, I felt a surge of adrenaline, a dizzying sense of victory. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel the heat of her humiliation burning a hole in the air behind me. The moment we stepped onto the polished dance floor, a space seemed to clear around us. The other couples subconsciously drifted back, creating a circle, putting us on display in the very center of the room. The band, as if on cue, transitioned into a slow, impossibly romantic Sinatra classic. It was all so perfect it felt scripted. Arthur pulled me gently into his arms, one hand firm and warm on my waist, the other holding mine. "I haven't done this in over 20 years, I confessed, my voice a nervous whisper against the lapel of his expensive suit. I could smell the faint, clean scent of his cologne. "I'm going to step all over your feet." "Impossible," he murmured, his voice close to my ear. "Just relax. Let the music do the work." He began to lead, and to my astonishment my body remembered. The steps came back to me, a distant muscle memory from a life I thought I'd left behind. We moved together, a slow, graceful sway. He wasn't just a good dancer. He was an exceptional one. He moved with a confident ease that made me feel weightless and elegant. For those 3.5 minutes, I wasn't a 42-year-old diner manager in a 10-year-old dress. I was a beautiful woman being swept off her feet. I risked a look over his shoulder. The entire wedding was watching us. Not with pity or scorn, but with rapt attention. They were captivated. I saw my son Jacob standing near the bar, his face a complex tapestry of awe, regret, and dawning horror as he realized the full scope of his misjudgment. And I saw Brittany. She was standing frozen by the head table, her arms wrapped around herself as if to keep from flying apart. Her mask was gone. All that was left was raw, unfiltered fury. She looked like a queen whose castle was being stormed. "Tell me about your dream," Arthur whispered, his lips near my hair as he spun me slowly. "The bed and breakfast. Where would it be?" "The coast of Maine," I found myself saying, the words tumbling out. "An old sea captain's house. I paint it blue. I'd have a huge garden." "It sounds beautiful," he said. "You should do it." "It's just a silly dream," I demurred. "Dreams are never silly," he said, his gaze serious as he looked down at me. "They're the blueprints for our second acts." It was in that moment, as he held my gaze, that the lines began to blur. The pretense, the performance, the revenge, it all started to fade into the background. I was having a real conversation, a real connection, with this extraordinary man in the middle of this surreal situation. Then I saw him, the wedding photographer, circling us like a shark. He was snapping picture after picture, his flash a series of brilliant staccato bursts. He was capturing every angle, every smile, every look that passed between us. Arthur saw him too. Instead of shying away, he smiled. As the song reached its crescendo, he executed a perfect, elegant dip, lowering me backwards, my back supported by his strong arm. I was so surprised I let out a genuine, uninhibited laugh. Flash. The camera caught it. The image of me laughing, radiant, in the arms of a handsome billionaire, forever preserved. That single photograph, I knew, was a more potent form of revenge than any angry words could ever be. It would be in Jacob and Brittany's wedding album forever. A glossy, permanent testament to the night their carefully crafted narrative was hijacked and rewritten by the woman they tried to erase. The song ended. The room erupted in applause, far louder and more enthusiastic than it had been for the bride and groom's first dance. As Arthur gracefully brought me upright, several people, Brittany's relatives, her parents' business associates, approached us immediately, their faces wreathed in opportunistic smiles. "Arthur, my boy. So good to see you," one man boomed, clapping Arthur on the back. "You must introduce me to your lovely companion." The tide had not just turned, it was a tsunami. The revenge was complete. Or so I thought. But as I watched Brittany stalk towards the stage, her face set like stone, grabbing the microphone from the bewildered band leader, I realized she had one more card to play. And it was going to be a nasty one. "All right, ladies." Brittany's voice cut through the air, sharp and jagged, devoid of any of its earlier sweetness. The room quieted down, sensing another round was about to begin. "It's time for my absolute favorite wedding tradition. All the single ladies, get yourselves out on the dance floor. Someone is about to get very, very lucky." A gaggle of young women, mostly her bridesmaids in their identical blush pink dresses, let out a series of performative shrieks and ran to the center of the room. They pushed and giggled, positioning themselves for the best catch. It was a pathetic, juvenile spectacle, and I wanted no part of it. I remained firmly in my seat next to Arthur, an observer in this strange ritual of feminine desperation. My plan was to simply be invisible to let the moment pass. But Brittany had other ideas. Her eyes, like a hawk's, scanned the crowd and then locked onto me with unnerving precision. A slow, cruel smile spread across her face. This was it. Her counterattack. "Oh, and we can't forget our most eligible bachelorette," she shouted into the microphone, pointing a long manicured finger directly at me. "Mother Miller. Eleanor. Don't be shy. Get out here." The spotlight slammed back onto me. My skin prickled under the sudden heat. A wave of murmurs went through the crowd. This was no longer a fun tradition. It was a public shaming. She was trying to force me into a box to label me in front of everyone. Single. Alone. Desperate. She was trying to undo everything Arthur had done, to drag me back down to the pathetic status she had assigned me. "Come on," she goaded, her voice dripping with malice disguised as encouragement. "You've been alone for so long. This could be your chance. Who knows, if you catch this, maybe you'll finally land a man to call your own." The insult was so blatant, so unbelievably vicious, that it sucked the air out of the room. This was her final desperate move to humiliate me, to put me back in my place. I was trapped. If I went, I would be participating in my own degradation. If I refused, I would be the bitter old crone who couldn't take a joke. My face was burning. I could feel my hands starting to tremble. I felt all the power, all the confidence I had gained draining away. I was about to just shake my head, to shrink back into the shadows when Arthur moved. He didn't stand up aggressively. He rose slowly with a deliberate, almost regal calm that drew every eye. He didn't look at me. His gaze was fixed like a laser on Brittany. The entire ballroom fell silent, waiting. He took a single step forward, placing himself slightly in front of me, a human shield. When he spoke, his voice was not angry. It was something far more devastating. It was calm, measured, and laced with an icy disappointment. "Actually, Brittany," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly to every corner of the silent room, "I don't think Eleanor will be participating." Brittany's smile faltered. "Oh, come on, Arthur. It's just a bit of harmless fun." "Is it?" he countered, his voice still quiet but gaining a sharp, cutting edge. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks a lot like a public spectacle designed to humiliate a guest. A guest who also happens to be your new mother-in-law." A collective gasp went through the room. "You see," Arthur continued, taking another slow step forward, his voice resonating with authority, "some people in this room might measure a woman's worth by whether or not she has a man. They might see a tradition like this as a chance for a woman who has been, as you so delicately put it, alone for so long. But I, and I suspect many others here, have a different way of measuring value." He turned his head slightly and looked at me, and his voice softened, filled with a profound respect that was more powerful than any declaration of love. "I see a woman who built a life, who raised an exceptional son, who runs a business, and who has navigated unspeakable loss with a grace and dignity that is frankly awe-inspiring. Her life isn't empty. It's full. Full of strength, full of integrity, full of love. She doesn't need to catch a bouquet to land a man. A woman of her caliber doesn't land a man. She chooses one. And any man chosen by her would be the lucky one." He then turned his devastating gaze back to Brittany. "So no, she won't be participating in your little game. Some traditions are just outdated excuses for cruelty. And a bride on her wedding day should be a source of joy, not a purveyor of cheap insults." He had done it. He had not just defended me. He had completely dismantled her. He had championed me. He had articulated my worth in a way I had never been able to myself. The silence that followed was deafening. Brittany stood on the stage, the bouquet hanging limply in her hand, her face white with shock and fury. She had been publicly exposed, her pettiness laid bare for all to see. Her perfect wedding was in ruins, and she had only herself to blame. From the corner of my eye I saw movement. Jacob. He was pushing his way through the stunned crowd, his face a mask of pale horror. He was walking towards me, his eyes wide with a terrible dawning understanding. The real reckoning was about to begin. Jacob stumbled to a halt in front of our table, weaving slightly as if the floor had tilted beneath him. He looked like a ghost. His eyes, wide and haunted, darted from my face to Arthur's, then back again. The carefully constructed facade of the happy groom had crumbled, leaving behind a lost, shame-faced boy. "Mom!" The word was a croak, raw and fragile. What is all this?" I looked into my son's eyes, the same eyes I had gazed into for 23 years, and for the first time, I felt a chasm between us. He wasn't just asking about Arthur. He was asking about the entire night, about the public humiliation he had witnessed and sanctioned with his silence. "I'm just a guest at my son's wedding, Jacob," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of my hurt. "I'm enjoying the evening with my friend." "Your friend," he repeated, his gaze locking on Arthur with a mixture of suspicion and awe. The gears were turning in his head, trying to make sense of this impossible equation. His poor, lonely mother and this titan of industry. "Since when? You never said anything." "Who is he?" Arthur, who had remained standing, a calm and formidable presence at my side, stepped forward almost imperceptibly. He extended his hand to Jacob, not as a challenge, but as a simple statement of fact. "Arthur Vance," he said, his tone even and polite. "It's a pleasure to meet you properly. Your mother speaks of you with immense pride." Jacob took his hand, his grip limp, his eyes still wide with shock. "Vance," he breathed, the name confirming his worst fears. "Like Vance Hotels." "That's the one," Arthur said with a slight nod. He still hadn't released Jacob's hand. He held my son's gaze, and his next words were delivered with the calm, incisive skill of a surgeon. "She is incredibly proud of the man you've become, the lawyer you are." He paused, letting the compliment land before delivering the blow. "That's why it was so surprising to me, as a layman, that you didn't raise a single objection while your own mother was being brutally cross-examined in front of a jury of her peers tonight." The legal analogy was a scalpel, and it cut Jacob to the bone. He flinched and pulled his hand away as if Arthur's had been red hot. A dark flush crept up his neck. He started, his voice failing him. "I didn't know what to do. Brittany. She just gets like this sometimes. She doesn't mean it, doesn't she?" Arthur's voice was still quiet, but it held a new dangerous edge. "She seemed to mean it when she put your mother at a table by the kitchens. She seemed to mean it when she broadcast her baggage to 200 people. And she certainly seemed to mean it when she tried to parade her on a stage for one final humiliation." He took a step closer to my son. "A woman like your mother is a rare and precious thing, Jacob. She is the foundation upon which your entire life was built. A real man, doesn't stand by silently while someone tries to tear down his foundation. He defends it. At all costs." Every word was a hammer blow, shattering the fragile justifications Jacob had built in his own mind. He had no defense. There was no argument he could make. He was guilty, and the verdict had just been read aloud by a man he could only dream of emulating. He finally looked at me, his eyes swimming with a desperate, childish shame. It was the same look he'd given me when he was 10 and had broken my favorite vase. "Mom," he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I am so sorry. We need to talk. After the honeymoon. Promise. I'll fix this." My heart ached with a painful mix of love and disappointment. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, my voice softer than I intended. He was still my son. "Go. It's your wedding night. Go be with your wife." He gave me one last, tormented look before turning and walking away, not back to Brittany, but towards the exit to the gardens, his shoulders slumped. He looked broken. And as I watched him go, I knew Arthur was right. I was a foundation. And tonight, for the first time, cracks had appeared. I didn't know if they could ever be truly repaired. The party died a quick and awkward death after that. The energy had been sucked out of the room, replaced by a thick, uncomfortable tension. The band played a few half-hearted songs to a nearly empty dance floor before packing it in early. Jacob and Brittany made their exit without the traditional fanfare, slipping out a side door with a few hurried goodbyes to her parents. They looked less like a happy newlywed couple, and more like fugitives fleeing the scene of a crime. As the last of the guests departed, leaving a wake of half-empty glasses and crumpled napkins, Arthur stood by my side. The theatrical performance was over, but the quiet, solid comfort of his presence remained. "Well," he said, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips as he surveyed the wreckage of the reception. I do believe the show has officially closed. I can't thank you enough, I said, turning to him. The adrenaline was starting to fade, leaving a profound bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. You didn't have to do any of that. Yes, I did, he said simply. Kindness isn't a choice, Eleanor. It's a responsibility, especially when you see someone being treated with such profound unkindness. A comfortable silence settled between us, the first truly peaceful moment of the entire night. But it was tinged with a little sadness. This was it, the end of our strange alliance. He would go back to his world and I would go back to mine. The night doesn't have to be over just because the party is, he said softly, seeming to read my thoughts. I know a place downtown. A quiet little coffee shop that stays open all night. No spotlights, no champagne, no drama. Just the best damn coffee in Charleston. Would you be interested? The cautious part of my brain, the part that had been in self-preservation mode for 2 decades, told me to say no, to thank him graciously and go home. This was a fairy tale, and the clock was about to strike midnight. But another voice, a bolder, more hopeful one, pushed its way forward. After the night I just endured, didn't I deserve a little bit more of this feeling? This feeling of being seen? I would like that very much, I found myself saying. The coffee shop, tucked away on a quiet cobblestone street, was an absolute haven. It was warm and dimly lit, smelling of old books and fresh espresso. We slid into a worn leather booth in the back, and the contrast with the cold, opulent ballroom was so stark it was almost comical. Here there were no expectations, no performances. So, I began, after the waitress had brought our coffees. Now that the battle is over, I have to know the whole truth. Tell me about the ex-wife. He smiled into his cup. Ah, the infamous Amelia, he said. She was very much like Brittany but with more experience. She came from a family whose name was their currency. Our marriage was less a union of hearts and more a merger of influential families. Our divorce was brutal. Not just about the money, though there was plenty of that. It was about the narrative. She hired a ruthless PR firm to paint me as a cold, cheating business mogul. It was a war fought in the headlines. He looked at me, his expression serious. She almost won. She almost convinced me that I was the monster she described. It takes a long time to find yourself again after something like that. It was a window into his world, into the pain that fueled his actions tonight. I felt a deep sense of connection to this powerful man who, in his own way, had also been publicly shamed and redefined by someone else's narrative. I understand that, I said quietly, feeling like you've been erased. I told him about my life after my husband's funeral, how quickly I went from being Laura's wife to just Jacob's mom. I told him about the struggles of running the diner, the constant worry about money, the loneliness that was a quiet, constant hum beneath the surface of my busy life. I talked for what felt like hours and he just listened, his eyes never leaving my face. You're an amazing woman, Eleanor Miller, he said when I finally fell silent. You're not a survivor. You're a builder. You built a life, a business, a good man, all from scratch. His words were like water on parched ground. No one had ever called me a builder before. And now, I said, feeling a blush creep up my neck, I'm on a first date for the first time in 23 years. He leaned forward, his hand covering mine on the table. His touch was warm and steady. Is that what this is? He asked, his voice a low, intimate murmur. I don't know, I answered honestly. The whole night has felt like a play. I'm not sure where the performance ends and reality begins. Then let's make it real, he said, his thumb gently stroking the back of my hand. Eleanor, this is a date. And if you'll let me, I would very much like for there to be a second one. The question hung in the air, simple, direct, and utterly terrifying. It was a doorway to a life I had long since boarded up. All I had to do was decide whether I was brave enough to walk through it. My heart hammered against my ribs. A second date. It was such a simple concept, yet it felt monumental. It meant letting someone in. It meant being vulnerable again. It meant admitting that I wanted something for myself, something beyond being Jacob's mom. I looked at Arthur, at the sincerity in his eyes. There were no games here. No pretense. Just an open, honest invitation. The fear was there, a cold knot in my stomach, but for the first time in a long, long time my hope was stronger than my fear. Yes, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I'd like that. The smile that broke across his face was like the sun coming out from behind the clouds. It was genuine and unguarded, and it made my own lips curve into a smile I couldn't contain. We stayed until the first hints of dawn were lightening the sky, talking until our voices were hoarse. When he drove me home through the quiet, sleeping streets of Charleston, the world felt new, full of possibilities. He walked me to my front door, the porch light casting long shadows. It was that awkward, hopeful moment at the end of a first date. "Tomorrow night?" he asked. "I'll make a reservation somewhere quiet. No risk of ambushes." "Tomorrow night would be perfect," I said. He didn't lean in for a kiss. Instead, he did something far more intimate. He gently took my hand, the one that had scrubbed countertops and balanced budgets and held my crying son, and he brought it to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to my knuckles. "Good night, Eleanor," he murmured against my skin. "Good night, Arthur." I breathed and slipped inside my house, my hand tingling, my heart soaring. I leaned against the door and closed my eyes, and for the first time in 20 years, I wasn't just a mother. I was a woman. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind. We had our second date and a third and a fourth. We went to a tiny Italian restaurant he knew. A hole in the wall with the best pasta I'd ever tasted. We spent a whole Sunday walking through a historic plantation garden, talking about everything from politics to our favorite books. He was intelligent but not arrogant. He was successful, but he never made me feel small. He was simply Arthur, and I was simply Eleanor. It was easy. It was wonderful. And then one Tuesday afternoon Jacob called. He was back. His voice on the phone was strained, unfamiliar. "Mom? Can I come over?" "Just me. Brittany's at her mother's." An hour later, he was sitting on my sofa, the same sofa he'd done his homework on as a child. He looked haggard, older than his years. He couldn't look at me. He just stared at his hands, twisting them in his lap. "Mom," he started, his voice thick. "I've done nothing but think about that night. Every single day. What I let happen. The things she said. The way I just sat there." He finally looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and full of pain. "There is no excuse. I was weak and I was a coward and I betrayed you. You are the best person I know, and I let my wife treat you like you were nothing. I am so sorry." The apology was raw and unfiltered, and it broke my heart a little. "I accept your apology, Jacob," I said softly. "The honeymoon was a disaster," he continued, a bitter laugh escaping him. "All we did was fight." I kept playing Mr. Vance's words over and over in my head. "A man defends his foundation." And I realized I hadn't. I let her convince me that to be a good husband, I had to be a bad son. He shook his head. "She wants to apologize too. She's been a wreck. I think seeing you with him." It didn't just confuse her, terrified her. She built her whole world around this idea of social power, and then she saw someone who had none of it, in her eyes, being treated like a queen by someone who has all of it. It broke her brain. The irony was crushing. My worth had been invisible to them, until it was reflected back in the eyes of a powerful man. "She wants to invite you both to dinner," Jacob said, his voice pleading, "to try and make things right." I thought of Arthur. I thought of my new fragile happiness. Did I want to subject it to Brittany's toxic world? But then I looked at my son, at his desperate, pleading face. He was trying to fix this. He was trying to be a better man. "All right, Jacob," I said, making a decision. "We'll go. But on one condition." "Anything," he said. "It's on my turf," I said. "You're all coming to my house. And I'm cooking." I needed to see them in my world on my terms. The power had to stay with me. The following Saturday, my little house felt like a powder keg waiting for a spark. I had spent the entire day cooking, not out of a sense of domestic duty, but as a form of therapy. The familiar rhythm of chopping vegetables and stirring sauces was calming. This was my space, my kitchen. Here I was in control. Arthur arrived an hour early, carrying a ridiculously expensive bottle of wine. He found me in the kitchen, flour on my cheek. He just smiled, kissed the floury spot, and started setting the table without a word. His silent, steadfast support was a rock. "Whatever happens tonight," he said, "we're in it together." When the doorbell rang at precisely 7 o'clock, my stomach clenched. Jacob and Brittany stood on my porch. Jacob was holding a bouquet of lilies, my favorite. Brittany was holding a small, elaborately wrapped box from a high-end bakery. They looked like two very well-dressed children on their way to the principal's office. "Come in," I said, my voice more neutral than I felt. The dinner was a masterclass in tension. It was held in my small dining room, a space that Brittany had once described as cozy, if you like clutter. Tonight, she was the picture of polite deference. She complimented the food, the decor, my dress. It was a relentless charm offensive, and it was utterly exhausting. Her main focus, however, was Arthur. She directed most of her questions to him, her tone a careful mix of respect and intellectual curiosity. She asked about the hotel industry, about emerging markets, about his philanthropic work. It was a transparent attempt to align herself with him, to prove that she could operate on his level, that she wasn't the petty tyrant from the wedding. She was trying to build a new alliance, this time with him. Arthur handled her with the effortless grace of a man used to navigating complex negotiations. He was polite, engaged, but he continually gently redirected the conversation back to me. "That's a fascinating point about branding, Brittany," he'd say. "But Eleanor is the real expert on customer loyalty. You should hear how she talks about her regulars at the diner." Or when she asked about his travels, he'd reply, "I've been fortunate to see a lot of the world, but Eleanor has a dream of opening a B&B in Maine that sounds more beautiful than any 5-star resort I've ever built." With every conversational parry, he was reminding her, and Jacob, that this dinner was not about him. It was about me. He was refusing to let me be a spectator at my own apology. Finally, as I served the dessert from the bakery box she'd brought, Brittany cleared her throat. The moment had come. "Eleanor," she began, her voice low and rehearsed. "I know I apologized at the restaurant, but I wanted to do it again here in your home. My behavior was inexcusable. I was insecure and I was cruel. I misjudged you completely, and I am truly deeply sorry." She looked at Jacob, who gave her an encouraging nod. "I hope in time you can forgive me. I want us to be a family." It was a good speech. All the right words were there. But my heart felt a strange sense of detachment. I thought back to the wedding, to the raw public hatred in her eyes. This polite, remorseful woman seemed like a different person. But was she? Or was this just another, more sophisticated performance? "Thank you, Brittany," I said, choosing my words with care. "I hear your apology." I paused, letting the weight of my next words settle. But forgiveness isn't a switch you can flip. It's a process. And trust is something that has to be rebuilt one honest action at a time. A family isn't built on apologies. It's built on consistently treating each other with kindness and respect, especially when no one is watching. I looked at Jacob. That goes for everyone. The message was clear. The slate was not wiped clean. This was not the end. It was the beginning of a very long probation. A new set of rules had been established, and I was the one who had written them. Brittany just nodded, her eyes downcast. For the first time, she seemed to understand that she couldn't charm or buy her way out of this. She would have to earn her way back. If she even could. The ball was in her court, but I was no longer waiting by the net. The year that followed was one of slow, cautious reconstruction. Brittany, to her credit, tried. There were no more grand gestures or expensive peace offerings. Instead, there were small, consistent efforts. A phone call just to see how my week was going. A card on my birthday. An invitation to join them for a casual Sunday barbecue. Not a stuffy dinner party. It was a fragile truce, built on the shared understanding that one wrong move could shatter everything. I remained watchful, guarded, but I allowed the possibility of a real relationship to exist. Jacob continued to change. The counseling seemed to be working. He became more assertive, not just with Brittany but in his own life. He started standing up for his own opinions, even when they differed from hers or her family's. Most importantly, he rebuilt his relationship with me, not as a duty but as a priority. We had our own Sunday morning calls, a new tradition that I cherished. He was finally becoming the man I had always hoped he would be. But the most profound change was the one that happened within me. Life with Arthur was a revelation. It was a daily education in what it felt like to be a true partner. We weren't just a couple, we were a team. He celebrated my successes at the diner as if they were his own. When I finally found the courage to enroll in a small business management course at the local college, he was my biggest cheerleader, helping me study and celebrating my A-pluses with champagne. We traveled, but it wasn't about the luxury. It was about the shared experience. I'll never forget one evening in Paris. We weren't at a fancy restaurant. We had bought a baguette, some cheese, and a bottle of cheap red wine, and we were sitting on a bench by the Seine as the sun went down. The lights of the Eiffel Tower began to sparkle. I was wearing a simple sweater and jeans. I looked at him, this brilliant, powerful man who was laughing at some silly story I was telling, and I was overcome with a sense of peace so profound it brought tears to my eyes. "What is it?" he asked, his smile softening with concern. "I'm just happy," I whispered. I'd forgotten what this felt like. This simple, easy happiness. He pulled me close and we sat in silence watching the boats glide by. In that moment I wasn't defined by my past, my struggles, or my relationship to anyone else. I was just Eleanor, a woman in love, in the most beautiful city in the world. A year to the day after Jacob and Brittany's wedding, Arthur and I were back at his country house in the mountains. The autumn air was crisp, and the leaves were a riot of red and gold. We were sitting on the porch, a comfortable silence between us. "A year ago today," he said softly, "I met the most remarkable woman I'd ever seen." "A year ago today," I countered with a smile. "I was having the worst day of my life." "Funny how those two things can be the same day," he said. He turned to me, his expression shifting, becoming serious and intensely focused. He took both of my hands in his. "Eleanor, I used to think my life was full. I had success, I had wealth, but it was an empty kind of full. It was a house, not a home. You are my home. You are the color in my black and white world." My heart began to beat a little faster. I knew what was coming. He reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small dark blue velvet box. He opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of white satin, was a ring. It was a single perfect diamond, elegant and understated. It was everything I would have chosen for myself. "I know you don't need me," he said, his voice thick with an emotion that made my own eyes well up. "That's one of the million things I love about you. You are the strongest, most self-sufficient person I've ever known. You don't need anyone. But I need you, Eleanor. I need you more than I've ever needed anything." He slid off the bench and knelt on one knee on the cool wood of the porch. "Will you do me the incredible honor of being my wife?" The tears I'd been holding back spilled over, tracing warm paths down my cheeks. They weren't tears of sadness or pain. They were tears of overwhelming, unexpected, earth-shattering joy. "Yes," I breathed, the word a happy sigh. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." Our wedding 6 months later was the complete opposite of the event that had brought us together. We held it on the porch of the mountain house at sunset. There were only 30 guests, our true friends and family. I wore a simple cream-colored dress that made me feel beautiful and, more importantly, made me feel like myself. Jacob walked me down the makeshift aisle, his hand squeezing mine tightly, his eyes shining with a pride and love that was, this time, entirely real. Arthur was waiting for me, and when our eyes met, I saw my entire future, safe and bright, reflected there. Brittany was there. She and Jacob had been working hard, and a tentative, fragile peace had settled between us. She was quieter now, more thoughtful. During the small reception inside, she approached me while I was looking at the fire roaring in the stone fireplace. "Eleanor," she said softly, "I've never seen a couple look at each other the way you and Arthur do. It's real." There was a wistful, almost envious tone in her voice. It was a quiet admission that her own grand wedding had been a spectacle, while my small, simple ceremony was a true celebration of love. "I'm happy for you," she added. And for the first time I actually believed her. Life settled into a beautiful rhythm. My business course was complete, and with Arthur's encouragement and a small business loan he insisted on arranging, no gifts he knew I wouldn't accept, I started putting my dream in motion. I found a small rundown property on the coast of Maine, an old sea captain's house just as I'd dreamed, and began the long process of renovating it. About a year into our marriage, Jacob and Brittany came to visit us in the mountains. They were radiating a nervous, excited energy. After dinner they sat us down. "We have some news," Jacob said, grinning from ear to ear as he took Brittany's hand. "You're going to be grandparents." The joy that flooded through me was pure and absolute. A new life. A new generation. A chance for our fractured family to truly heal. As Brittany's pregnancy progressed, something shifted in her. Her calls to me became more frequent. She asked questions not just about pregnancy but about motherhood. About being scared. About feeling overwhelmed. She was letting her guard down, showing me the vulnerable woman beneath the polished exterior. One afternoon, she called me in tears, panicking about something the doctor had said. I spent an hour on the phone with her, calming her down, sharing my own experiences, mothering her in a way I'd never been allowed to before. The day came, and I was there at the hospital with Arthur. We waited for hours, and then Jacob came out to the waiting room. His face scrubbed clean with exhaustion and pure, unadulterated awe. "It's a girl," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "You have a granddaughter." When we went into the room, Brittany was holding a tiny, perfect bundle. She looked exhausted but radiant. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. "We named her Eleanor," she said softly. "But we're going to call her Ellie. We want her to grow up to be as strong and as good as her grandma." I took my tiny granddaughter in my arms. Her little hand curled around my finger. I looked at her perfect face, and my heart felt like it might burst. I looked up and saw my son, my husband, and my daughter-in-law all watching me, their faces filled with love. The ghosts of that horrible wedding night, the humiliation, the betrayal, the loneliness, they were finally completely banished. They had no power here, in this room filled with so much love and new life. Later that night, as Arthur and I drove home, he reached over and took my hand. "That night," he said quietly, "when I asked you to pretend to be with me, I thought I was just doing a good deed. I had no idea I was stumbling into the greatest adventure of my life." "Funny, isn't it?" I said, leaning my head against his shoulder. "How the most painful moments can lead to the most beautiful destinations." What had started as an act of petty revenge against a cruel daughter-in-law had blossomed into this. A new love, a healed relationship with my son, and a granddaughter who carried my name. The universe truly works in the most mysterious of ways. My greatest humiliation had, in the end, become my greatest salvation. The best revenge wasn't seeing Brittany brought low. It was seeing myself rise higher than I ever thought possible. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It's proof that no matter how dark a moment is, it doesn't have to be the end of your story. Sometimes it's just the beginning of a much better chapter. I have to ask, have you ever experienced a moment that felt like a betrayal, only to find that it unexpectedly pushed you toward something wonderful? Please, share your story in the comments below. Your experiences give strength to us all. And if this story touched your heart, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more.